So throughout coping skills, you learn dozens of different tidbits of very useful information. However, there's a few pillars that I deem the most important things that you learn. And I deem them so important that after I teach them in the classroom setting, I start every single class by writing them on the board. You've learned one of these so far. Very first thing we discussed in Module 1, the cognitive triangle. I write that on the board at the beginning of every single class because it's crucial to understand that relationship if you really want to improve your mental health and your emotional regulation and your coping skills in general. In this video, you're going to learn about two other pillars that I write on the board at the beginning of every class because I think they are crucial. So I will point these out in this video. So the first pillar is this model that describes how emotions work. It takes what are emotions and kind of steps it up another level and shows how they kind of interact in our everyday lives. So they start with a prompting event. Now this can be something externally or internally. So externally, it could be passing your coworker in the hallway, seeing that friend, getting the wrong order at a restaurant, anything that happens to you. Internally, it refers to you having a thought. Maybe you think back to the 4th grade when you did that embarrassing thing. Maybe you think back to, oh no, why did I act that way in that job interview? That's why I didn't get the job. Or even thinking forward to, am I going to have for supper? What am I going to do next week? Where am I going to get the money for this? Planning into the future. So those are internal events that happen. The next step, and a very crucial step, especially when we want to have a better control over our emotional regulation, is the interpretation. Something happens, either externally or internally, and then we interpret it. Our minds start going to work to make sense of whatever happened. So maybe you pass somebody in the hall and you say, hello, how are you doing? And they say nothing to you. Your brain then interprets it. And this is where we have an opportunity to properly utilize emotional regulation. And often we go to the negative. Well, they're mad at me. They dislike me. I did something wrong. Why won't they listen to me? Or maybe they didn't hear you. Whatever the case is, we make an interpretation of the events. Once we make that interpretation, that's when we start to experience an emotion. That's when all those physiological things start happening. Our heart rate could increase or decrease depending on the emotion that we have kind of worked ourselves into. Muscles can tense up. Hormones, chemicals can be released throughout the body. This brings us into our 4th step of emotional expression. Emotional expression is us showing our emotions on our face. It's us acting in a certain way. It's us saying a certain thing based on us now experiencing that emotion. And it's interesting too that there's kind of a little bit of a feedback loop between 3 and 4 here. The acting of it can then increase the physiological response. So if we are getting tailgated in a car and we start to get angry and we have those body sensations, we get hot and our muscles tense up and then we start yelling and screaming, that behavior can then cause us to have more of those chemicals released in the body, more of that sensation to happen, and causes us to get angrier and angrier. It causes a feedback loop. And then finally, the last stage, the after effects. This is where that emotion, that event, those cascadings of feelings and behaviors then imprint into your brain, then wire to say, yep, this is the way things are. And I'm going to use an example here in a second to show how critical the way we act and the way we respond to things wire our brains to be a certain way. But it's then after it's over that really the damage is done. So I'm going to use a traumatic event. You can tell this story with any number of situations, but I think this does a really good job of illustrating how powerful this model of emotions is and how critical it is to interrupt it a bit if we want to have better control over emotions, better control over our cognitive triangle. So imagine this. Step 1, the prompting event. You're a young child, 3 or 4 years old. You're out for a walk in the park with your parents, and there's a dog there, and the dog's not on a leash, and the dog runs up to you, and you go to pet the dog, and it bites you on your hand. You get bit right on your arm. It doesn't bleed, you're not injured, but it hurts a lot. You're bit by an animal at this point that's just bigger than you, and it really hurts. That's your prompting event. That's step 1. At this point in your life, the interpretation, step 2, doesn't take a lot. Ow, I got bit. That hurt. That's painful. That's danger. That's fear. That's scared. Just fear. Very primal in this moment. This then causes the emotional experience of fear, anger, sadness all at once. It causes physiological response. Most likely at this point in your life, it's going to be the fight, flight, or freeze. Muscles tense up, your heart rate increases, and you then start to express it. And through your expression of this, it's most likely going to be crying, running away, going back to your parents, screaming. You could sit down and freeze. But that then causes the after effect, that memory, that experience, that wiring in your brain, that dogs equal a bite, dogs equal pain, dogs equal fear, sadness, anger, all those emotions that you just so powerfully felt. Flash forward to 20 years later. You're walking down the street, you see the same breed of dog in a park, unleashed. Because of that event, you're going to go through a similar cascade of events. So the prompting event in this future situation is you just see a dog of a similar breed. Interpretation. When I was younger, I got bit by a similar dog. That dog might want to bite me too. That then causes the fear, the anxiety, the emotions that you have caused because of your interpretation cascade through your body. Your muscles tense up, your stomach, you get that knot, you start sweating, you start breathing heavily. You can see it on your face. You're afraid, you're scared, and you run away. That then causes the after effect. If I avoid dogs, I am not going to get bit. That I left that situation and I was safe. Reinforcing the memory, the experience from when you're a child. And we do things like this every single day. And that is why it's so difficult to get out of those ruts, because we have acted in ways that we think are helping us for survival. And in some situations, back when we're fighting bears, it would have. But we're not fighting bears anymore. So it's having an understanding of this and hijacking it that will help you so much in understanding your emotions and your behaviors. Alright, so the next important key, the next critical thing that I can teach you guys is how to interrupt this emotional cycle. And it's all going to take place at the interpretation stage of the emotional cycle. So, as I said, that this emotional cycle is the first key pillar, the important thing you want to learn. This second thing, that these next 4 steps that I'm about to go over are crucial. They are coping skills. This is the coping skill that you are about to learn. So, when we get into a situation, we have that initial event that can either be external or it can be internal. So it's either a thought that you have or a situation that happens to you. Typically, when we live in anxious or stressed out or depressive states, we're primed to then interpret it in a way that reinforces the anxiety, reinforces the depression. But what we are going to do is approach it a little bit differently. And again, this is something that takes practice, so I'm going to show you a few examples. But when something happens and you start to go down that rabbit hole, you start to spiral into your thoughts, we're going to do something different. We're going to use these 4 steps that are coping with strong emotions. So if somebody cuts you off on traffic and you just get so angry, if your best friend hasn't talked to you in a week and you think about them and you start crying, these are the 4 steps that you can take so that you interpret the event differently and therefore change your emotional reaction. first thing that you have to do is identify the emotion and accept that you're having it. Every emotion that you've ever had is valid. It's okay to feel it, but what you do afterwards is important. How you react to that emotion is what matters. So don't get mad at yourself for feeling a certain thing. No emotion you've ever had is invalid. It's how you act on that emotion that matters. So the first thing that you have to do is identify and accept. And this is where the emotion wheel can come in again, because there's so many emotions, as you know. So it's really important to be able to identify it, know what different emotions are, so that you can properly identify it. We're going to identify the emotion in 3 steps. First step is just notice that you're experiencing an emotion. We talked about a little bit earlier about all the different characteristics of emotion, how they're quick, how they're very impactful on the body. So take a second to just acknowledge that you're experiencing emotion. Second step, label it. We have this wonderful wheel. So once you notice that you're having it, label that emotion. And then finally, accept it. Say, it's okay that I'm having this emotion. Know that there is no emotion that you've ever had before that's bad. Thoughts are just thoughts. Accept it. So that's our first step, identify and accept the emotion. You do that by noticing, label, and just saying, you know what, it's okay that it happened. The second step is step back. Get yourself a little distance from the situation, be it the memory, the thought that you might be having in your head, or the situation. Take an opportunity to not just immediately react on the impulse of emotion, because emotions, again, are so powerful. They cause us to fight, flight, or freeze, to get angry and tense up our muscles, to cry. They very quickly get us to behave in a certain way, but we're going to step back. We're going to take an opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to immediately react. And one of the best ways to step back, mindfulness. Take an opportunity to be mindful. Take a breath and relax. Do a grounding technique. Do the 5 senses activity. Any one of the many mindfulness activities that we talked about. This is your opportunity to implement them in a difficult situation. So you identified that you're experiencing an intense emotion, accepted it. Now you're going to step back and relax for a minute. Ideally, what this is going to allow you to do is to think. Because when we are living in that fight, flight, or freeze, it's all of our very basic brain functions. We're not using our thinking human part. We're using what's known as the reptile brain, which is just that very primitive act. So by stepping back for a minute, we allow those emotions to dissipate a little bit, and we can think clearly. So that's our third step, is to think. What am I going to do? What is going to be an appropriate behavior? Because so many of us have an emotion and we react, but we don't think. So, and that's where we get in trouble, is because we act and then we have regret, we have remorse, we have guilt about what we did, how that behavior affected us. Or we act in a way that's not conducive to helping our mental health. So maybe you have social anxiety and there's a knock on the door and your emotions kick in and you immediately run in your bedroom and hide. Well, you're just reinforcing that negative behavior. Again, cognitive triangle. You're reinforcing these negative behaviors, and that's what we want to change. So by having an opportunity to think, we can act in a way that's going to benefit our mental health. And then finally, so we've identified, we've taken a second to step back, we've thought, and what we've then going to do is act. So you might be saying, Zach, well, I don't know what to think. I don't know how to make a plan in these situations. I don't know what to do. Well, the acting phase is very important because it's actually called act or don't act. So in many situations, especially when anger is the root emotion, that the event happens, we snap into anger, and then we think, well, we kick, we scream, we yell, we break something. So in that situation, the proper thing to do is not do anything at all. Just accept that, you know what, something happened out of your control and you're angry about it. Step back, breathe, think, you know what, I don't need to go and snap that CD, or I don't need to go and break that whatever, because that's not going to help anything. That's just going to make the situation worse. So one of the best things to do, and this is why the emotional wheel is so important, is because acting typically means doing the opposite of an emotion. So a lot of times when we're angry, we want to act out, so we decide not to. A lot of times when we're sad or really feel that deep sadness within us, we tend to avoid people. So we want to do the opposite and engage with others. Go talk to somebody, go open up, not stay in your bedroom and stay away from the world, to properly express ourselves. When it's something that we're afraid of, typically what we do is we avoid it at all costs. This is the social anxiety, this is the phobia, this is so many things in our lives. We just avoid it because we're afraid of it. The best way to do it, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, but just face it. If it's a phobia, if it's a social anxiety, you have to approach that fear, because when you just keep running away from it, you're reinforcing, well, I can do this, I can avoid it and be okay. But that's not always conducive to our life, so we have to really take the situation head on. So I want you guys to look at this chart, really look at the resources that you have. Check out the resources on the Google Classroom or the Wakelet, and you'll see all kinds of stuff about how to act opposite. So what I would recommend to everybody is to make a list of the situations that particularly cause you the most intense emotions, and think about how you can act differently, because that's the first thing, is you got to plan ahead. I can teach you this, and you're like, okay, Zach taught me the 4 steps, which are identify, take a step back, think, and act. Yeah, I told you those, but in a situation, they're not going to work if you don't practice it. So take an opportunity and think about what is a situation where you get particularly angry or particularly sad or particularly scared, and plan it out. Alright, so we're going to end this last video with just some more basic information that can be very helpful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how different people can experience the same emotion so differently. So some of us seem like we're primed to have really intense emotional feelings, and that can happen for a whole bunch of different reasons. So there's 4 reasons that we're going to talk about. The first one's just biology, that sometimes it's just the way that our bodies are, is that we're more sensitive, more likely to have those intense emotions. Like some people, sense of touch is more sensitive than others. Some people's eyes are better than other people. It's just biologically how we're built. We can be more sensitive to certain things, and emotions are one of those things that we can be more sensitive to. The next step is vulnerable factors, and this basically comes down to Module 1. So again, if you're hungover, not getting enough sleep, if you're not exercising, if you're not taking time to do things you enjoy, not socializing with anybody, you're going to be more primed to experience difficult or more intense emotions. Think about it. If you're tired, you're going to be ready to snap. You're going to be primed to fall over that waterfall of emotions. It's just, they're right there on the surface. So that's why it's so important to do all the things we discussed in Module 1, because it's going to make sure that 1, you're less likely to become overcome by strong emotions, and 2, you're going to be more apt to handle them in the difficult situations. The third step is modeling and learning. So we take so much from our parents, the people around us, the people we spend time with, and if they are somebody who is more apt to have really intense emotional experiences, we are as well. We learn so much from people. So it's that nature versus nurture, and they both play a role here. Again, biology, just how you're built, and the way that you've learned to deal with emotions can play a huge role in how you deal with them. And the final and 4th thing that we're going to talk about is just your judgment of your emotions. So if you're an individual that constantly judges yourself so harshly, so just negatively, that you in your own mind have to be perfect, you are going to be more likely to judge the emotions in a way that is not going to be helpful to dealing with them. So if you're that individual who needs to be perfectionist and you have that emotion of anxiety, of anger, you're going to think, why am I this way? Why am I feeling like this? I'm not good, I'm not bad, I'm broken, I'm wrong. That actually does the opposite of what we want and will make the emotions more intense. Alright, and I'm going to leave you just with a few last tips when it comes to emotional regulation. Again, I really recommend that you focus in on understanding how emotions are born and the 4 steps of dealing with extreme emotions. Look at those opposite emotion worksheets and really start to dissect situations where you're feeling intense emotions and how you can do the 4 steps to have different outcomes so that you can rewire your brain so that you're not primed to fall back into your old cycles and have the emotional wheel work against, or the emotional cycle work against you. You can then change it so that you're getting into better patterns. So here are some tips and tricks just to help you along the way. Remember, every emotion that you have serves a purpose and none of them are invalid. They're okay to have. There's no emotion that's bad. It's about how you act on them. Every emotion serves a purpose. Acknowledging your emotions, identifying your emotions will help you so much and will make you more sympathetic to those around you and have better communication skills as well as handling your intense emotion. Avoiding your emotions, not dealing with them, has never helped. It's not about suppressing emotions, it's about experiencing the emotions and then behaving differently. Trying to push them down and keep them in there is only going to make things worse. Feelings aren't right or wrong, it's about how you act. A great metaphor, and there's so many different ones of these. We talked a little bit about the clouds and the chairs and things last week, but think about your thoughts as like a boulder. A boulder is there, but you don't have to pick it up. When you pick up the boulder, when you focus in on those thoughts, when it becomes heavy and hard to deal with, they can be there without you picking it up. Thoughts are just thoughts. You do not have to engage with them. Just like your thoughts, just like any diagnosis that you've had in the past, your feelings are just one aspect of you. You are a beautiful, complex, diverse person. You aren't just your anxiety. You aren't just your sadness. You aren't just your anger or your guilt. You are so much more. So don't label yourself as your depression. You're more than that. And finally, I'll say it 1,000 more times, this takes practice. Look at what we've discussed. Think about how it can apply in your everyday life. And that is what is going to help you. I'm just giving you guys information. It's you who has to do the hard work. It's you who has to take the time and energy to implement these things in your lives so that they can make a real difference. So that is going to be it of Module 3. There is going to be some worksheets and a reflection to complete, and I highly recommend that you check out all the resources in the resource bin because they're going to be incredibly helpful. Again, if you have any questions, any comments, you can put them in the stream, you can send me an email, or we can discuss them next week at our follow-up meeting. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks you again.